Hello, welcome back to my channel. And welcome to the 22nd day of Chanmas. I hope y'all are having a fantastic day whenever you are watching this. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my worst books of 2021. Now, I will preface this by saying two things. Number one, if you loved any of these books, I am so happy for you. We all have different taste in books. These ones just didn't personally work for me. And then number two, not all of these books on this list came out in 2021. They're just books that I read this past year that didn't personally work for me. So without further ado, let me get into the 6 worst books of 2021. First up, we have One Day in December by Josie Silver. This is one of the first books that I read this year, and boy did it have a lasting impact on me because I still remember how much I hated this book this many months later. This book is about Lori, who apparently at the start of the story did not believe that love at first sight really exists, but by the end of the story, she's changing her tune. She ends up seeing this guy named Jack, who she doesn't know his name is Jack at the beginning of the story. She sees him at a bus stop and they make eye contact. I think she's on the bus, he's at the bus stop, and they instantly fall in love just from one glance. Now, over the past few years, Lori has been trying to hunt Jack down and find him because clearly just this one look has made her convinced that they are soulmates. And one day she gets her wish come true, sort of, because she ends up seeing Jack at a Christmas party, but unfortunately things can't be quite that simple, and this man is actually dating Lori's best friend. Now, the story is set over a 10-year period, and we get to see Lori and Jack kind of fight their attraction for each other and then eventually get together. And my issue with this book is not the cheating, surprisingly. I don't always hate cheating in a romance. In fact, I think it can make for some nice drama and angst. My issue with the story is really just the premise of love at first sight. I feel like it can be done well sometimes. Honestly, one of my hottest books of this year has love at first sight. Maybe I'm just a hypocrite, but this one really didn't work for me because of the way that Lori just acts all high and mighty from this situation. She's like, I deserve to be with this man because I saw him at a bus stop and I think he's hot. And it seemed like all of the attraction there was just attraction. Like, there was no basis for this relationship beyond looks and beyond just a passing idea that we could maybe be good together, which is a shame because this is a book set over a 10-year period. You would expect there would be some relationship development, and it just unfortunately never materialized. I really didn't like this book, and I gave it 1 star, and I wouldn't recommend it. And it was one of my worst books of 2021. Now, it absolutely pains me to put a Mariana Zapata book on this list, but unfortunately, Rhythm, Chord, and Malakin, I think that's how you say it, did not work for me. Now, this story is about our main character, Gabby, who, because of a couple of different life circumstances, ends up on a tour with her brother's band. They ask her if she will sell merchandise for them, and she says, sure, my life kind of sucks right now. I'm going through a breakup, or I recently went through a breakup. I don't have a steady job, and I don't have anything else to do, so yeah, sure, I will get on a tour bus with 4 or 5 sweaty, gross, misogynistic men. And that's the story, folks. She gets on this tour bus, and I thought she was actually going to fall for one of her brother's bandmates. She actually falls for the lead singer of the headlining band on this tour. And like, here's the thing, I like a good rock star romance. I don't like a singer-songwriter romance, but I do like a good rock star romance. I feel like the forced proximity when it comes to touring and kind of the grittiness of touring can be really fun. But this book was not really fun for so many reasons, but the main two are that the romance here I felt was just really weak for Mariana Zapata. And I don't want to chalk it up to the fact that this wasn't a super slow burn romance, but I just don't feel like there was enough development here between our two characters. I didn't understand why they should be together. But the bigger issue here for me was the absolutely egregious amount of misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia in the book. The bandmates are constantly making transphobic remarks. Our heroine is constantly slut-shaming and saying misogynistic things, and I think you're supposed to think that it's cute and charming and relatable and that guys will be guys. I couldn't stand it. It was really hard to read about, and every time I listened to it, actually, I listened to this book on audio, I was just cringing, and I thought that hopefully it would go away, or it would be, you know, certain characters, and that this language would be questioned, and it just never was, and it never got better, and overall, I just can't in good conscience recommend this book. It was just not a good time to read, and it's gotten me to kind of rethink some of my feelings about Mariana Zapata's work, which really sucks. I wonder now if I went back and read some of her stuff, if I would still feel the same way about those books, or if those other books contain the same things that I didn't like in this one. So this was really a disappointing book for me, and frankly, it was just one of my worst books of the year. Okay, let's talk about this dud. The Maidens by Alex Miglides. I really liked The Silent Patient when I read it. Now I'm wondering if that book was actually any good now that I read The Maidens and realized there were some similarities between the two. But The Maidens is about our main character, Mariana, whose niece phones her up one day and is like, hey, someone on campus got murdered and I'm scared. And Mariana's like, you know what? I'm gonna go to campus. I'm gonna give you a hug. And she hugs her niece Zoe, and then she determines that she is going to be the one to solve this string of murders that's been happening on campus. I want to say it's at Cambridge. So Mariana helps the police. She's like, I'm gonna team up with y'all and I'm gonna figure this shit out. I don't remember like what her actual job title is and if she's even qualified to do this. I want to say she's not, but she ends up kind of accusing one of the professors on campus, Edward, of doing this stuff because he's just sort of a creeper. And like, of course, the one creepy professor on campus is the one that is killing these women. That's obviously not the case. Like, he's the red herring here, if we even want to call him that. My issue with this book is that there was no lead up to the twist or the whodunit aspect to the story. That was my biggest, well, one of my biggest issues with the book. I feel like if you're gonna write a mystery and a thriller, you need to have a little bit of respect for your reader. Lead them to the point. Lead them to what the mystery could be. Instead of doing a bunch of wild red herrings and then just kind of throwing an ending at us that we didn't see coming, that irks me more than anything. And that really happened here. It was like, okay, it's definitely this man who did it and we're gonna find out why he did it. Like, that's gonna be the reveal here. But no, we find out that it's someone completely that we never suspected before, and their reasoning for doing it, I honestly just can't talk about the story. Like, it just, it upsets me. I don't like when twists in books focus too heavily on mental health, or in this case, grooming. It was not handled well. It was handled quite poorly, and I just don't feel like that should be the whodunit or the twist in a story. I don't know. I don't feel like there's any other way to really say that. It didn't work for me. I'm not saying that these elements can never be present in a mystery thriller, but I think it depends on how you use them, and in this story, I personally found it insulting. So I didn't like this book. I don't know. Alex Michaelides is a thriller writer for me, and I wouldn't recommend this one. Next up, we have a book that I couldn't decide initially whether it should be on my most disappointing books of the year or worst books of the year list, but putting the author of this book aside and looking at this book objectively, I feel like not only is it disappointing because I like that author, but as a book, it was just not good. And that is claimed by J.R. Ward. This story was pitched to me as a sort of like paranormal romance, like J.R. Ward is known for writing and publishing. This was not that. This was sort of like a thinly veiled attempt at romantic suspense, and it just really did not work. This book is about our main character, Lydia, whose goal in life is to save wolves from being killed and or endangered by this hotel chain who's trying to put up hotels in the sanctuary of the wolves, right? Now, Lydia ends up being aided in her investigation of who's killing all the wolves by the groundskeeper that's recently hired, this kind of like mystery man, and they, team up to find out who's killing the wolves. What about that is paranormal? What about that is exciting? I'll answer that for you, nothing. The paranormal element doesn't come in until the very end of the book, and who you think is the werewolf is not the werewolf, which, you know, you could call that like fun and interesting and plot twisty. I didn't consider it that. I was a little bit irritated. I don't know. There's a twist also that happens at the end of the book that kind of pissed me off. I don't want to get into it because maybe you want to pick this book up, but if you're looking for developed and interesting characters or a really fun and exciting plot, you're not going to find it here. I think I said it in my Goodreads review, but this book reminds me of Dark Lover if Beth had not left the newspaper to hang out with the vampires. She had just stayed in Caldwell and just lived her boring life. That's what this book was. It was not very exciting. It was not a good book, and I think you could pick up pretty much any other paranormal romance and be more excited about it than you would be excited about this one, so this was definitely a worst book of the year for me. All right, get ready to pick up your pitchforks because I'm about to make the aesthetic girlies quite mad. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. It really shouldn't come as much of a surprise that this is one of my worst books of the year. I have yet to have any true luck with a V.E. Schwab title. I think my main issue with this book is that I was promised a story about a girl who made a deal with the devil and a girl who is forced to live forever with no one knowing who she is. And I thought that I was going to learn a lesson from that and there was going to be some strong message and takeaway and that I'd get to see this girl traveling and learning things on her travels. Unfortunately, we just get this mopey girl walking around New York and falling for the most boring guy ever simply because he is the one person who can see her and not forget her. I think my issue really with V.E. Schwab's books is not so much that her writing is terrible, but it's that none of her characters have a lasting impact on me and none of her stories really say much. The concepts are always fantastic and so interesting. I mean, seriously, a girl making a deal with the devil and then no one remembering who she is sounds fantastic and I'm so excited to see that on paper. Her stories just never grip me. The characters never do anything surprising or interesting. They never really have desires beyond the ones that are written literally in the synopsis. And it's frustrating because I thought that the idea here, again, was so good, but the execution was so lacking that I have to consider this a worst book of the year for me, which sucks because it's a super pretty book, but I am really convinced that the people who like this book just like the aesthetic of it and maybe like the quotability of certain parts of the story. I found it really forgettable, frankly, and that's part of the reason that it's on this list. I'm just always so upset whenever I read a V.E. Schwab book and the execution is just not as great as the synopsis would lead you to believe. So this is one of my worst books of the year. And I'm sorry to say it, it just is. And then lastly, we have I Owe You One by Sophie Kinsella. I was really excited to pick this book up. I read this book for a list video, but I was a really big fan of like the Shopaholic movie, and I think I read one or two of Sophie Kinsella's other books, and I really had a good time with them. She writes kind of this charming blend of like women's fiction, rom-comness that gives me very like mid-2000s vibes. So I was excited to pick this book up, but unfortunately it was pretty bad. Our main character, Fixie, is in charge of fixing not only her own life, but the lives of everybody else that she comes in contact with. Her family absolutely sucks. Every member of the family is completely incompetent, and yet Fixie is supposed to fix everything. One day, she is at a coffee shop. She ends up doing a favor for this guy by watching his laptop, and some really wild circumstances happen where like the ceiling, I think, falls down at this coffee shop, and she's able to save this guy's work laptop, and the guy is like, oh my god, I owe you one. And that's kind of how the romance goes. They keep like owing each other favors. One of the favors is that this guy is going to give Fixie's like really shitty crush a job, and he becomes a player in the story, and it's kind of like a love triangle. It just wasn't good. I like women. I like women in stories who go on a journey, specifically. I don't mind if at the start of a story we have a heroine who is unable to speak up for herself, or is unable to do certain things, or has something she's working on. I think most characters need to have like a growth arc in a story for it to be interesting, but Fixie never ends up standing up for herself. She continues to make excuses for her shitty family members, and on top of that, the romance just was not very romantic. I didn't really care about either of the supposed love interests, and honestly, this book was just frustrating to read. Like, if you want to read a book about a human doormat, please pick this book up because you will be so happy. If you want to read a book about a woman who ends up changing her own life or gain some sort of confidence, you will not find it here. This was easily one of the worst books that I read this year, and I am sad that I ever picked it up, frankly, or that I had any expectation that this would be interesting. But those are the 6 books that I read this year that I considered to be the worst. I read quite a few books this year, so to make it on this list is quite the accomplishment. So I guess hats off to these authors and these books. But that being said, obviously, I know that a lot of people ended up loving these books, and that maybe some of my favorite books were some of your worst books. So I'd love to know in the comments down below if any of these were also on your worst books of the year list, and also what books made your worst books of the year list, ones that maybe weren't on mine. Maybe so I can avoid those books in the future. But thank you so much for watching this video. I love you so much, and until tomorrow.